Well, we just asked a question in our groups. Have you ever started something you couldn't finish? For you, was that a book, Tolstoy's War and Peace? It was. um, maybe a few movies or films that you've walked out of. How about something you've eaten? Maybe that steak, just a little bit ambitious in the size of the steak that you ordered. I thought I'd bitten off a bit more than I could chew when I decided to do a master's degree and I had to write a thesis. And it took me 3 years to finish it, pretty much. There were some times when I think it just felt a whole lot easier to give up, if I'm perfectly honest. Well, I don't know whether that ever applies to you for the Christian life, whether you'd ever think of the Christian life as something that you've started, if you're here as a Christian. You wonder whether you've really got stickability, whether it's something that you could see yourself finishing. Well, when it comes to the Christian life, God knows that it isn't easy. And the 3 verses that we had read for us from the Bible are testimony to that fact. In our reading, we saw how the author of the letter to the Hebrews suggests that being a Christian is like running a race. And his advice to us makes it clear that when he says race, he doesn't have a 100-meter sprint in mind, but something more like a marathon. So the first verse says, run with perseverance, or to use the English Standard Version, run with endurance. The race marked out for us. I don't know whether you think of yourself as an endurance athlete. You fit into that category, I don't know. But that's what you are if you're a Christian, according to verse 1 of Hebrews 12. You're an endurance athlete. And of course, the idea of the Christian life being like running a race can be found in a variety of places in the Bible. So 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul tells us to run in such a way as to get the prize, a crown that will last forever. Or how about this? At the very end of his life, shortly before his martyrdom, the Apostle Paul can say this, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. So our question this afternoon is a pretty simple one. It's this. Can you finish what you've started? Or in other words, how can we persevere in the Christian life? Maybe you're not a Christian, you're thinking, well, one of the reasons I'm not a Christian is I don't know whether I could stick at it. Would I ever stay a Christian? Well, look at Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. I've put them up on the screen behind you, and I've kind of done what I would do if it were in my Bible. I've sort of highlighted bits and underlined bits. I can't do italic in my Bible, but you get the idea. Look, he says, let us run. So it's not a walk, it's not a sprint, but it's neither is it a stroll in the park. Let us run with perseverance or endurance, the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured. That's why I like the ESV, because it picks up the same word. He endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured, there's that word again, such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So in other words, the temptation for you and me, if we are Christians, is that we'll grow weary, that we might lose hearts. Certain circumstances, situations in life may make us think, is this really worth it? And the writer to the Hebrews says, well, if you're going to endure, you're going to have to fix your eyes on Jesus and consider him. To complete the race, here it is in a nutshell for our time this afternoon, to complete the race, we will need Jesus. We will need Jesus to complete the race. Those who make it to the line do so by fixing their eyes on him and considering him. John Owen was a man who lived at the time of Oliver Cromwell, so if you like Gunpowder, it's a bit too gruesome for me. I didn't even start that, let alone finish it, but if you've been watching Gunpowder, think going back in time another 50 or 60 years to the time of Oliver Cromwell and the English Commonwealth. And John Owen was made Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University under Oliver Cromwell's protectorate. And this is what he had to say as a godly Christian man about the Christian life. He says, a constant view of the glory of Christ. He's picking up the language of Hebrews. A constant view of the glory of Christ will revive our souls and cause our spiritual lives to flourish and thrive. The more we behold the glory of Christ, by faith now, the more spiritual and the more heavenly will be the state of our souls. The reason why the spiritual life in our souls decays and withers is because we fill our minds full of other things. Remember, there's no TVs, no movies, no iPhones. This is 1640s he's writing. Is we fill our minds with other things. But when the mind is filled with thoughts of Christ and his glory, these things will be expelled. This is how our spiritual life is revived. So 3 points this afternoon, quite quickly. 3 ways in which we are to fix our eyes on Jesus. Are you ready? Point number 1, run like Jesus. Run like Jesus, because he is the example of faith. I ran the Birmingham Half Marathon a few weeks ago. It wasn't a pretty sight. Hannah saw me running a bit of it, and she can testify to that, I'm sure. It wasn't pretty, but I made it, okay? And one of the features, if you wanted to take them up on the offer, were official pacemakers. They were it was sponsored by Duracell, and they were dressed a bit like Duracell batteries, and they had a bit of a flag thing coming out of their back, and they had a time on them. And essentially, these guys were running the half marathon. They said, if you want to run it in 2.5 hours, follow me. I'm your pacemaker. If you want to run it in 2.25, if you want a different one, run it in 2 hours, and you could follow the pacemaker. And their goal was to help you stay on track. All you needed to do was keep them in view and keep up with them. So if you wanted to, you could use them to track your run. And because you were tracking them, it meant you didn't need to time yourself or think, where am I? You didn't need to think, am I going too quickly or too slowly? You just follow the pacemaker, your example. Well, when it comes to the Christian life, who is your pacemaker? Who is your example? Who do you look to? Hebrews says, for you and for me, if we're Christians, that person is Jesus. Run like Jesus. 2 reasons given to us here in the passage. We're told, firstly, he's the pioneer of faith. The pioneer. The word there means founder or forerunner. So he's our pacemaker. He's the guy who's gone before us and who marks out the course. Change the idea a little bit. Think of a film where you see an intrepid explorer going through the jungle. And it's an unmarked course, and he gets his machete out and he's hacking away through the jungle ahead of everyone else who's walking behind him. He cuts the path. That's the language that's being used here. Jesus is the one who's gone before us. He's the pioneer. He's led the way to heaven. But he's not only the pioneer. Do you see the other P word there? He's the perfecter. What does that mean? Well, it's no good following someone who starts well. Imagine following one of those Duracell battery guys on the half marathon and they get lost halfway around. They take a left when they should have taken a right. It's no good following a pioneer if they can't also be a perfecter. It's no good following a guy who said, I'll get you around the track in 2 hours, who actually turns out to take 2 hours 45. The pioneer and the perfecter. Jesus didn't just start the life of faith well, he finished it well. He went all the way to the cross, and then his Father in heaven raised him to life so that he's now seated in heaven. Maybe you're thinking, well, I wonder whether there is a way to heaven. And how would I know? And the Bible says, well, look to Jesus, because he's the perfecter of faith. He got to the end. He is now seated at the right hand of God. He's the one that we should follow. Jesus is both the pioneer and the perfecter. He's gone ahead and he's made it to the goal. He led the way and he finished the race. Maybe you're here and you're not a Christian. You're thinking, what really is the difference between Christianity and other religions? What's the difference between Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad? Well, there's lots of different ways you could answer that. Let me just give you one answer for the sake of time and for the sake of today. Let me just give you one way in which there's a huge difference. Buddha died peacefully in India, aged 80 years old, surrounded by his followers. Muhammad died aged 62, ruler of much of the Arab world, in his palace, having every luxury, including a harem. Confucius died aged 75, having become the most important teacher in Chinese culture, famous and revered for his writing. Jesus died aged 33, stripped naked on a Roman cross, an instrument of torture and death, rejected, abandoned, mocked, and betrayed. Yet, the bodies of Buddha, Muhammad, and Confucius lie in the ground today. And that is what followers of those teachers will tell you. Their bodies are in the ground today. Not so Jesus. Jesus has been raised from the dead to immortal resurrection life and sits at the right hand of God. If you went looking for Jesus' body, you would never find it. Jesus was the pioneer of faith, but the perfecter. He's no longer here, in a sense. He has gone ahead of us into heaven. So what is the faith that Jesus had? What do we mean by faith when it comes to Jesus? We'll turn back to the first two verses of Hebrews 11, and we're told what faith is in those verses. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. That's what we have there in verse 1. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see. So it's confidence and assurance in things we can't see. So faith, in other words, isn't just believing that there's a God. Faith means living your life based on the confidence that God is real and that if we follow him, he will take us to be with Jesus. So I could say, for example, that I have faith that that chair will support my weight. But the only way in which you know I have confidence and assurance, in other words, a living faith, is if I sit down in that chair. I might say I have confidence that you're a very careful driver, Jeremy. But, to have any real confidence, I've got to get in the car with him and prove it. You see the difference between claiming something and living something? Well, we are to have an active faith because that's what Jesus had. Jesus had confidence and assurance that God would take him to be with him in heaven, and Jesus was willing to put that faith to the test when he was willing to even go to death on a cross, in the knowledge that God would vindicate him by raising him from the dead after his death. Jesus had to be a man of faith, in other words. He went to the cross in the conviction that God would resurrect him. And that's what happened. He trusted his Father, even when it wasn't easy. Just read the Garden of Gethsemane account and realize what it meant for Jesus to have faith. He had to believe something he couldn't see, that it was worth suffering, that it was worth going to a death on a cross, because God would vindicate him and honor him. So here's the question for you, and maybe you want to pick this one up afterwards, I don't know. Here's a question for you. Is it worth basing your whole life on the promises of God? Is it worth basing your whole life on the promises of God? Because that is what Jesus did when he went to the cross. He trusted that his Father was good. He trusted that even though he would die a death for our sins, God would raise him again on the third day. He based everything, his whole life, on the idea that God would vindicate him. And what the writer to the Hebrews says, if you want to keep going as a Christian, you're going to have the kind of faith that Jesus had. Because you're going to have to base your whole life on stuff you can't see. And to do that, you're going to have to say, well, if Jesus could do it, and I know God has raised him from the dead, and therefore it was worth it for Jesus, why isn't it worth it for me? Of course it must be worth it for me. We just need to say to ourselves, when we're struggling to say, should I stay a Christian? We just need to say to ourselves, what became of this man of faith? What happened to him? Well, God honored it, and God raised him. There were many reasons why Jesus could have struggled to go to the cross, but he went that way. Someone has said in all of this, Christ had to trust and believe that his Father would justify him when practically everyone else at some point in his ministry was against him. He believed, against the advice of everybody else in the world, that God would honor him, and he went to the cross. So if you're finding it hard to be a Christian at the moment, if you're saying, is it worth me basing my life on something I can't see? Ask yourself, what did God do for the man of faith, Jesus? And if you don't know who to talk to about whether it's worth staying a Christian, if you're wondering who would really understand my struggles, my doubts, my concerns, well, the Bible's answer is the person to go to is the man of faith, Jesus. Talk to him. The struggle to live by faith in this world is a struggle that Jesus shared. And yet he went and was ultimately rewarded. He's the pioneer and perfecter of faith. He's the one that you and I should go to. So run like Jesus, because he's the supreme example. But secondly, more briefly, run to Jesus, because Christ is the goal of your faith. So don't just run like Jesus, but run to Jesus. Sorry to brag about my half marathon again. I promise I won't ever use it in a sermon illustration after today, but it just fits our passage, doesn't it? But when I ran it, and it's the only one I've ever run, what kept me going was that I was running it for someone else. And I was running it for someone else in two ways. I was running it because I was running for a charity, St. Mary's Hospice. So I was raising money for charity. I thought, well, if I stop, a lot of people have pledged money to this hospice. So I want to run it for the hospice. And I was also running it for my boys, who I knew were going to be watching partway, and we'd agreed the point at which, so I knew I definitely couldn't stop before I got to the bit where they were. And my motivation was their happiness. So I was running it for someone else. But when you think about the Christian life, we don't just run the Christian life following Jesus. We run it for Jesus. We run it because our goal of the race is to be with Jesus. So if we love him and our desire is to be with him, we'll run to him. And we'll run for him. He's our inspiration. He's also our prize. So fix your eyes on Jesus, verse 2, and consider him. Fix your eyes on him has the idea of don't get distracted by other things. So focus, stay focused, stay focused. Fix your eyes to the exclusion of other things. Do you remember learning to ride a bike? I've been teaching my boys over the past few years, quite an experience. But what's absolutely crucial to keeping the bike up, right, is where you look. So if you look to the left, the bike will go to the left. If you look to the right, the bike will go to the right. If you look down at the floor, the bike will hit the floor. Where have you got to look to keep going? You look ahead. And I had to keep saying to my boys, look up, don't look left, don't just look forwards, the bike will follow. Where you look, the bike will follow. And so it is with us. Fix your eyes on Jesus. If you get distracted over here, that's where your whole life will go. Over here, get distracted, it'll go over there. Look down, you'll fall over. Don't get distracted. Fix your eyes. And then verse 3, it's a different word that's used here. Consider means kind of chew on it. Reflect on it, like a Werther's sweet. You've got to suck it. Think about Jesus. Consider him. What did he go through? Why did he think it was worthwhile? How do I discover the life of faith lived out in the example of Jesus? Consider how he endured suffering and opposition and still thought it was worth it. John Piper, in his book Desiring God, says, I am constantly astonished that people who say that they believe in God live as if happiness were to be found by giving him 2% of their attention. Surely the end of the ages will reveal this to be absurd. What percentage of your attention is Jesus worth? If he's the pioneer and perfecter of your faith. If the promise of fixing your eyes on him is heaven itself and being with him, how much of your energy and your time should you give him? And how often should you consider him? Reflecting on Jesus, reading a book about Jesus, meeting up with other Christians who want to think about Jesus as well. All of those things are necessary, aren't they, if we're going to keep running a long-distance race? The danger of distraction, very real. The danger of forgetting, very real. No, we need to keep our eyes on Jesus. And obviously being here on a Sunday is a great way of doing that. Meeting up with another Christian maybe in the week would be good. Why not join the City Life group as well on a Thursday evening and gather with a number of guys who are here on a Sunday to think about Christ? Finally and briefly, run like Jesus. He is the endurance athlete. Run to Jesus. He's the goal of your race. Finally and thirdly, run with Jesus. Run with Jesus. Because he's not only the goal of your faith, he's actually, as we've been learning in this series, the source of your faith. I'd like us to watch a short video now, and this short video features two brothers called the Brownlee brothers. They're the world's two best triathletes, and they're the gold and silver Olympic champions. And just watch this little bit from a BBC video.
Now, Johnny has to win and to be sure of taking the title. And right now he seems to have lost control of his legs, and this is worrying. Oh, and he's starting to slow, and there is a little way to go. There's half a K to go, and Johnny is running out of time and is losing. He's losing his sense of direction. This is worrying. Oh, goodness me. This is a horrible sight. Jonathan Brownlee has lost it now and has staggered to a stop at the side of the course. And Alistair's stopped to help him along. And Alistair is going to try and carry his brother home. Dramatic scenes in Cozumel as the Olympic champion carries his younger brother towards the podium.
Oh my God, I cannot believe what we are seeing here, Matt. Is this allowed? Is he allowed to help his brother? You know, is that part of the rules? I'm not too sure. We've never seen anything like this before.
Unbelievable scenes. Unbelievable scenes in Cozumel. The Brownlee brothers arm in arm, but it's not by way of celebration. Henry Schoeman's celebrating. He's going to win this race in Cozumel out of nowhere. But we have to be concerned about the health of Jonathan Brownlee, and they're not even on the final stretch yet. Schoeman wins in Cozumel. The brothers are coming home arm in arm to finish in second and third, but Johnny can hardly stand, and Alistair is having to drag him across the line and pushing him home for second. Johnny finishes in second. Goodness me, what an incredible conclusion here in Cozumel. I've never seen anything like that anywhere in world sport. Worrying scenes all round.
Well, you'll be pleased to know the Brownlee brothers are fit and well and running hard. I love that line, though, don't you, in that video? Alistair is going to try and carry his brother home. And that's what he did. He literally carried him to that finishing line and got him over, and he actually pushed him over the line ahead of himself into that second place. And, you know, the Christian life isn't you on your own on weak and wobbly legs trying to run a race for Jesus. The Christian life is Jesus running with you and very often keeping you going, putting his arm around you, sustaining you and enabling you to run and finish the race. And that's really important because you don't know what tomorrow will bring. You don't know what your life is going to look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I don't know what you think might be the very circumstance where you think, I don't know whether I could keep going as a Christian if that happened to me. But I wonder whether it's at precisely that time where the Lord Jesus will put his arm around you and keep you in the race. David Johnson was at the age of 7 tragically diagnosed with a brain tumor. And they operated, and after bouts of radio and chemotherapy, they thought that they'd removed it and dealt with the problem, and that David was on the road to recovery, but sadly it wasn't to be. And 15 months after first being diagnosed with a brain tumor, he was given the devastating news. He was losing the battle, now aged 8. And it was the job of a doctor to explain things to David and his family, and I know his family. And the doctor said to him, he said to the doctor, "Am I going to die?" Aged 8, "Am I going to die of this brain tumor?" And the consultant replied, "Yes, I think you are." David looked at him and said, "Do you know, I have a friend, and his name is Jesus, and he died for my sin. I know I am going to heaven." Aged 8. The consultant put his hand on David's head, saying, "You know, David, you're a very brave boy. I'm a Christian too. God will help you. Jesus has died and come back to life. He will take you to heaven. And he will also help your mum and dad." Now, I can't imagine a scenario like that in my own family's experience or in life. But that doctor said to that very brave boy, Jesus will help you. Jesus will take you to heaven. And when, like Johnny Brownlee, you stumble, and when you even fall, Jesus picks you up. Run like Jesus, run to Jesus, but most importantly, we run with Jesus. Thomas Watson was a Puritan minister, and he said, "As the Spirit is at work in our hearts, so Christ is at work in heaven." Christ is ever praying that the saints' grace may hold out. And Jesus, today, if you're a Christian, is praying for you. And he's praying that God will keep you in the race and keep you going to the end. So, let me ask you, if you're finding the Christian life particularly hard, who do you look to? And Hebrews 12 says, look to Jesus. Run like Jesus, run to Jesus, run with Jesus.